Geese Howard, the ruler of the criminal underworld of Southtown, terrorized its citizens with extortion, theft, and violence. Sensing his reign over Southtown would be threatened, he killed his old rival Jeff Bogart in cold blood. However, what Geese did not realize was that 2 orphans under Jeff witnessed his violent actions, and though they weren't strong enough at the time to stop him, the demise of Jeff Bogart would spark the destiny of those orphans. That was the day that Geese Howard had set up his own demise. For in 10 years, those orphans returned, having trained in different styles of martial arts all over the world in order to get revenge on Geese. This was the birth of the legendary Hungry Wolves in their conquest of Fatal Fury. The Battle of Destiny begins now.
Welcome to the Fantasy Zone. Get ready.
In the early age of fighting games, it was hard to distinguish what exactly a fighting game was. There really weren't any traditional fighters in the sense that we know of today. Most of them would be beat-em-ups that had fighting game mechanics or elements. Hell, even the iconic Street Fighter wouldn't be what it is known for today until Street Fighter 2. Now, I don't really gotta tell you about Street Fighter 2, I mean everybody knew about it. But you gotta understand, it wasn't just a great game, it changed how fighting games were, and in a way, set up what traditional 2D fighters were gonna be. But not even Street Fighter was complete with mechanics yet, and while it did set an example, it was still early in the fighting game genre's life, so we still got many beat-em-ups trying to be fighters. However, one stood out from the rest in the same year that Street Fighter 2 came out: Fatal Fury, SNK's answer to the new fighting game boom. Before Mortal Kombat, before Virtua Fighter, before Tekken, there was Fatal Fury. Now, it wasn't just some clone of Street Fighter or a ripoff. No, this was made by the original designer of Street Fighter, the first one, Takahashi Nishiyama. So it's safe to say this guy was doing something more than just trying to capitalize on Street Fighter 2's success. In fact, Fatal Fury is something that would distinguish itself from those type of fighters. To start, the main character didn't even look like a traditional martial artist. No gi, no headband, none of that mess. If anything, he looked like an American trucker, but this guy kicked ass. Terry Bogard was a hype character who hid how he fights in his appearance. Along with him would be his brother Andy, a ninja, and his friend Joe, a Muay Thai kickboxer. Definitely a different set of characters than what was expected then. They were the only playable characters, as the rest of the cast would only be fightable as CPU opponents, kinda like a beat-em-up, and even gameplay would have beat-em-up elements with the 2-lane system, where characters can hop between 2 lanes to fight each other, along with a small cinematic story that no other fighting game was doing at the time. And I'm not just talking about the ending, I'm talking about the multiple cutscenes through the arcade run. All of this was on the powerful Neo Geo AES board. Fatal Fury seemed like the ultimate combination of beat 'em up and fighting game genres. But did this combination work? Yeah, I think you already know the answer. Hi, I'm Jay, and you're tuning into the J Blast Network as we head back to the arcades to put your quarter up for Fatal Fury. As I stated in the previous section, Fatal Fury's gameplay consists of elements of the beat-em-up genre and the fighting game genre. You only have 3 buttons: punch, kick, and throw, along with some special moves, with some being easy to pull off and some being stupid to pull off. Like these charge ones, they have to charge at a diagonal angle, and it's probably just me, but I freaking hate having to do these things. It just leaves me vulnerable when trying to pull them off. You also have the 2-lane system, which allows you to jump between the foreground and the background, and you can attack during these transitions, and you can also be attacked during these transitions. This is the most distinctive feature of Fatal Fury's gameplay, and you can even avoid attacks by doing this. It really does feel like a beat 'em up with fighting game elements, but with some really tough opponents later on. Master this system and it will help you get through the game, because without it, you're going to be seeing that continue screen a lot. One of Fatal Fury's defining features was its story and characters, particularly the playable ones. They stood out from the sea of martial arts types at the time, with Terry being a prime example. It also helps that Terry is one of the greatest fighting game characters ever. Angered by the death life of his father, Terry sets out across the world for 10 years in order to get strong enough to defeat Geese. He returns to Southtown after his training to take on Geese in his tournament, the King of Fighters. Terry's unique moveset is what makes him so damn cool. You got the Power Wave sending a giant wave of energy across the ground, Burn Knuckle where Terry lunges across the stage sending his opponent flying, Crack Shoot, an overhead kick that opponents fear countering, and his uppercut Rising Tackle, which is actually a legger cut. I don't know the right word for this, I just see him using his legs to perform an uppercut and call it that. With this moveset, Terry is one of the best to use in this game. He should be because he's the main character. Andy, Terry's brother, has the same backstory as him, but instead he learned ninjutsu in his 10 years of training. This gave him the Zanakin, a giant blast of energy, and the Hishoken, which is a move where he quickly charges into the opponent. Then there are the Shoryudan and the Kuhadan. Both freaking suck. The range is terrible, and the inputs are not worth getting your ass kicked to pull them off. That's the thing with Andy. He's so freaking lame, and it makes no sense for a freaking ninja to be the lamest character on the roster in the fighting game that came out in the freaking 90s, and he only has to compete with 2 other people. That is abysmal. We do not respect Andy Bogart around here. Then there's Joe Higashi, the champion of Muay Thai. He's related to the plot because he's Andy's friend, and he also jobbed to Andy. Oh dear, my man. You out here giving Andy of all people credibility? You hate to see it. But you shouldn't sleep on this Joe. He attacks fast and he has some wicked special moves, like the Hurricane Upper and the Slash Kick and the Tiger Kick. The TNT Punch just takes too damn long and leaves you vulnerable to your opponents because they know what you're trying to do, unless you already have them in the jab, which can be hard to achieve on later CPU opponents. Despite my grievances with Andy though, all 3 characters offer something unique to the gameplay, and your favorite will just depend on your playstyle. Me personally, I always stick with my main man Terry because he's the most fun and he's the coolest on the roster. Plus, he's the main protagonist. He's the only one that can really stop Geese for good. So let's see how he does it. Now, initially, you don't got to worry about much. You start out being able to pick between 4 characters, and if you started with the King of Fighters or Lato Fairy Fury, a couple of these characters will be recognizable, and a couple of them will have you going, who? Let's start with Richard Meyer. Now, you may remember his son or remember his stage of the Pow Pow Cafe from other SNK fighters, but for himself, he's kind of a jobber. He has a cool fighting style in capoeira, but other than that, the dude is just used to warm you up for the game. Michael Max is the boxer character and can be pretty tough depending on the order you fight him in. He hits really hard, so it's all about blocking and knocking him down with a special move. He's very forgettable, as this is the only Fatal Fury game he has appeared in, and I don't think he even appeared in the Fatal Fury anime. Bro is just lost in obscurity. And now we move on to my favorite opponent, Duck King, the Southtown DJ dancing with his fighting style. Duck King can be a little confusing to fight against, but hey, at least he stands out and he makes multiple appearances in future Fatal Fury games, but this is probably his weakest appearance. Then there's Tung Fu Rue, the master of Jeff, Geese, Terry, and Andy, but he didn't actually train Terry or Andy during the 10 years. He told them to go train, which is weird. He serves more as a test before you move on to the big leagues. Though he may look old and frail, this senior citizen packs a mighty punch, as during the match he'll transform into his buff state, stealing Master Roshi's flow bar for bar. Tung would also appear in future Fatal Furies and be memorable for his transformation, even though it's not really his technique because he stole it from Master Roshi. Once you defeat the first 4, you gotta worry about the last 4, which are all boss characters. Think of the 4 Heavenly Kings of Shadaloo in Street Fighter 2. Just like them, they all have gimmicks pertaining to them in their stage. Hawaii Ja is the first to give you the work, a former Muay Thai champion that was beaten by Joe. He seeks revenge for his defeat, so he upgraded himself to be a boss here. The biggest obstacle when fighting him is when he drinks. Dude thinks he's Sonic the freaking Hedgehog blitzing across the screen back and forth. And while that's enough to catch you off guard for a minute, his cheap tricks have cheap solutions. And when you learn how to counter, he goes down in a minute. Now you may be thinking this is gonna be easy to go through because of that last fight, but nah, it's about to get real because your next boss is Raiden, the giant wrestler. This dude will spit in your face and stomp you in your chest. And I ain't even playing. Look at this mess right here, man. And if it's not that, he's smacking the dog doo-doo out of you with his foot or slamming you into the pavement because he's a boss and he has priority on certain moves, especially his grapples. So don't expect to use your same tactics as the previous fights. Damn, man, I can't even catch a freaking break with this guy, bro. He was whooping me back and forth. I cannot lie to you. I don't know how many times I died against him. Watch out for Raiden. Now, if you somehow manage to get past Raiden it only gets worse from there, because you gotta deal with Billy Kane, the right-hand man to Geese. He was taken in by Geese as a kid, and he served him ever since. Geese taught him well. He fights with the Diambo, or the power pole if you're a Dragon Ball fan. And not only does he have the reach, but he has the damage and combos. His stage doesn't help either, as there's not a background to step into, so if he hits you, you'll bounce around between the cars. The best thing to do is to knock that damn pole out of his hand, but even when he's vulnerable, you can barely damage him for some reason, even though he's cowering like a freaking little girl. You gotta use your super moves to wear him down, and eventually you'll throw him off and beat him. But this guy also whipped me back and forth because his range is insane with that Niambo, one of the more annoying characters to fight in Fatal Fury. Now, as you play through the arcade mode, you may have noticed these quick little cutscenes where Geese Howard is watching me play. Now, Geese Howard will have different dialogue depending on the character you play as, but the story will revolve the same. Geese will get angrier and angrier the more you progress, and eventually he'll start taking more action, like sending his own henchmen against you, which is why you fight them. But now, Geese Howard has kidnapped you and taken you to his tower to have the final showdown. This is where the real fight against Geese Howard begins, and this guy makes the others look like Candyland. Bro can counter grab you, melt your health bar with Rasputin, and oh, he loves doing that. And overall, it's just a menace to fight. Don't even try to really fight him, bro. He will just beat the ever-living dog water out of you. This is an SNK boss, people. And you know, people always go on about Shao Kahn and Akuma, but SNK bosses make them look like Weenie Hut Jr. regulars.
What weenies? Would you care for another Diet Cola with a lemon twist, weenie?
Because of how cheap they are and because of how little hope you actually have of beating him. But as cheap as Geese is, there can be a way to stop him. That is the one thing about SNK bosses. They will have a very cheap way to stop him with a specific character or specific tactic. And I have one for Geese Howard that I made up myself. Get your butt in that corner and start to hop kick. Most of the time, Geese won't counter or hit you in the air, so you can keep getting free hits off of him. But eventually, he will go super fast and start spamming Rasputins. At that point, you gotta hurry up and defeat him before you die. Now, this method ain't perfect, and I've died a lot of times trying to do it, but eventually I was able to beat him. With the death of Geese Howard, the brothers' revenge is complete, and Jeff Bogart's death is avenged. Geese's reign over Southtown is no longer in effect, and the criminal underworld he ruled is now in shambles. Southtown has now been free, and the warriors of Fatal Fury begin a new destiny with their own lives. The arcade run of Fatal Fury is treacherous, and this was me playing on easy, you know. And y'all can call me a baby all you want, but SNK games are hard as hell, and I like to see you guys try to beat these games within a day, on normal or hard. Yeah, I bet you're cowering in your sheets now. But I imagine arcade players were breaking their fingers trying to get past this, because the last part of the game flips everything on its head. And it does feel more like a beat 'em up in that sense, as not only do the character gimmicks become more important, but the stage gimmicks become more important too. I can only imagine how many quarters were lost. Must have been thousands. But what about on the consoles? Now, there was a home version of the Neo Geo that pretty much was the arcade hardware, but it was very expensive. If you thought someone was rich to have an SNES and a Genesis at the same time, then you must have been a billionaire if you owned a Neo Geo and had games to play on it. To this day, Neo Geo is one of the most expensive pieces of hardware to collect for, along with the games. So for the rest of the poor peasants of gaming out there, you probably had a Super Nintendo or a Genesis, or if you were really behind, you had an NES, and if you were further behind, you had an Atari or an Odyssey. It sucks for you guys. And thus, SNK titles would be ported to those systems, just the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Now, when it came to arcade ports, it was always hit or miss. Some were good, some were decent, and some were absolutely terrible. Where does Fatal Fury fall into that? Well, it's more on the decent side for both consoles. The SNES version is the worst version because it takes out the gameplay mechanic of going in and out of the background. A two-lane system is completely butchered from this port of the game. Now the gameplay is very similar to Street Fighter, except with less options. And I mean the graphics. And look, the graphics do look more arcade accurate, but the gameplay was hindered. If the gameplay has to be hindered, then I don't care how the game looks. Even the cutscenes are hindered, with mostly black screens taking over the screen with white text. There is a mini game in between certain matches, but it's nothing like the arm wrestling game that was in the regular game. I didn't mention that earlier. There is an arm wrestling mini game that appears after certain fights, and it can be pretty hard to beat this guy at certain points. It's not nothing crazy for mini game like beating up a car or anything, but it's a pretty cool addition and a cool break from the regular fights. You do have to fight everyone here from the original though, and you have a versus mode, but you can only play as the same three characters that you can play as in the arcade mode. That's lame. If there was a winner in this, it'd be the Genesis, but it's like winning a competition of who poop smells the least. Don't get me wrong, it's got a lot going for it. The lane mechanic is still in, you get to fight the other playable characters during the arcade mode, and you get to play as the other fighters in versus mode. They finally put those characters to use. You can even make your friends rage by playing as Raiden's cheap ass. However, you may notice something, that there are missing characters and stages. Hawaii Ja and Billy Kane are both not in the Genesis version, nor are there stages, which is probably why you get to fight the other playable characters. Also, the graphics are worse, but that's a given because it's on the Genesis. But the sprites are also smaller, changing how the gameplay is ever more slightly. The soundtrack is also butchered, and don't tell me it's just the Genesis sound. The Genesis had some amazing music. It's just how it's being used to make that music. And it's messed up, and it sounds like what diehard Nintendo fanboys think the Genesis always sounds like. Overall, it's only better because it feels like it was made for the Genesis rather than making compensations to have a near arcade version in the looks. But it's nothing to go out of your way to play like ever. None of these versions are. Just stick to the arcade version, which is easier to get with all these collections and new releases. Now, you might have noticed I pointed out the versus mode for the multiplayer, and that's because Fatal Fury's original multiplayer is just co-op. Actually, in the arcade version, while playing co-op, once you beat the character in the co-op playthrough, you're able to fight each other. That's pretty weird how they make you fight the character, then fight each other instead of letting you fight each other. But hey, I can use extra help, and whoever wins gets to continue the arcade mode and also summon the co-op person again to fight with them. Which doesn't make any sense. Just let us play a co-op only mode if you want us to play a co-op only mode. That's weird beat 'em up logic, I guess. So you need those console versions if you want to have any semblance of versus battles, and it's just too bad they aren't arcade perfect, or they just aren't up to snuff in the first place. But I guess the sequel is what that is for. Now, I couldn't end the video without talking about this. Fatal Fury had an anime, and I think it was the first fighting game to have an anime. It was an OVA, an original animation, with Masami Obari to bring the character designs to life with his unique style. Now, some of you may know this guy, and if you know him, then you know most of his works contain badass fights, big boobs, and giant robots with massive swords. Any Super Robot Wars fans in the audience? What about Dan Cougar or Gravion? How about Gao Kaiser? Maybe some of y'all played that fighting game? Let me know in the comments. Well, he worked on all of that. Fatal Fury has those first two, the badass fights and the boobs, but not the last one, though it would be pretty badass to see Terry fight Geese in a super robot. His designs remain iconic to the series despite only being involved with the OVA. Well, enough anime knowledge. Let's see what the anime had to offer. Now, I'm going to be just showing screenshots because I do not want this video to be taken down, so I know the presentation can look a little weak compared to what's been going on before, but just roll with me. Maybe I'll show some scenes in between, who knows. Alright, so it starts out actually showing how Jeff died. Bro was just being kind to kids, but it was all a setup by Geese Howard to kill him. Side note, we gotta talk about how much of a bitch Geese Howard is in this. Like, for someone so strong, you gotta use kids to hold down your opponent. Sounds like a major fraud alert to me. Anyway, Terry, Andy, and Tung Fu see this, and instead of just training them both, Tung Fu tells Terry and Andy, these two little kids by the way, to go out in the world and come back in 10 years after they train enough. Bruh, what are the adults on in this OVA? We cut to 10 years and Terry is in Southtown ready to enter Geese's King of Fighters tournament. He heads to a bar owned by Geese and nah, my man grabbing cheeks with no remorse, man. Boy is a whole purr. Come on, Terry. They're making that fake ass ad look real. So then this chick Lily comes in and everyone in the bar starts gawking at her. Now, if you're deep in Fatal Fury lore, you may remember that Lily is Billy Kane's little sister, but this is not the same character. Billy is here being a menace in the background, you know, looking all tough and stuff, trying to show off, and Lily was just a kid that was forced to hold down Jeff as he got stabbed in the beginning. Now she's the lady of the town, if you know what that means. Not in a super bad way, but just, you know, the idol of the town, I should say. That's the perfect word for it. Now, she throws this rose that has thorns on it, and you know that's symbolism because she's all pretty and stuff, but she has her own demons haunting her and around her and that type beat, you know, like a rose with thorns. Terry catches the rose, my man begins to start macking on Lily. You know, Lily looking all sexy and smooth, and Terry feeling her in mysterious ways, but this ain't no place to protect, as those drunken jobbers start attacking Terry because they're jealous. Now, Terry washes squashes them with ease. But then Joe shows up and they both were about to fight until somebody snitched and called the cops, forcing them to run. You know, it was probably Geese's bitch ass, as he has the whole police under his command. Bro is asking the commission to track them down as if he can't just get up and do something. Anyway, Joe and Terry reconcile. We found out that Joe is friends with Andy and that they fought before. They bond over fighting while Geese begins plotting. The next day, Terry meets Lily helping out some kids, showing her soft side, you know, that whole soft part of the rose. Lily starts talking about her struggle with the kids and her position, and Terry already adds more symbolism, comparing her to a bird trapped in a cage. Lily being trapped in Geese's cage and Terry trying to talk her into being free from her cage. That's her whole arc. She thinks that this is the only way of life, this is the only way to get by in life, but as Terry proves, you can get by in a better way, even under terrible circumstances. But here comes Geese sending his goons to follow Terry. Like, come on, man, they were having a moment. Lily kisses Terry's hand, and yeah, everyone can see where this is going, and she gets a flower without thorns on her hair to show that Terry has gotten to her soft side. A lot of symbolism for a fighting game OVA in the 90s. It's very cheesy and very on the nose, but I'm here for it. Later on, Terry meets up with Andy by having a spar with him before Tongue stops him. Now, Tongue tells them the reason why they went on their journey was to see who would be worthy of learning the Hurricane Punch, or the Seppuku. This isn't something you can gain with just power alone. It's about what's in your heart. And here goes Andy trying to gas himself up, telling Tongue to teach him the technique, but man, I need you to sit your ass down because this is Terry's story, boy, and you know it. You ain't about to learn nothing but getting your butt whooped. Terry and Andy compete in the tournament to see who will learn the technique, while Geese realizes who Terry and Andy are and about the technique they're trying to use. Now, instead of confronting them, Geese sends out his goons to try to kill him. What a fraud. You see then a compilation of Terry, Andy, and Joe defeating people, including some cameos from the game itself. While that's going on, Geese tries to get Lily to poison Terry, but Terry's riz is too strong, and she finally gets out of her cage and stops him from drinking the poison. And Terry just continues to that like it's crazy how much this dude is macking on this girl, bruh. Pissed at this, Geese does what he does best, getting his jobber goons to do his dirty work. Stop hating, Geese, and do your own damn work. Bro got a sniper to try to shoot Terry, but my boy Joe comes in to save him, and Andy, him, and Lily and Joe try to escape. The main trio managed to get out thanks to Lily, but here comes Geese. Oh, now what are you gonna do? Oh, now you want to do something against someone who can't even fight back? Look at this little bitch ass, hating ass POS. Toss an old girl out the window. Now, Lily could have just gone down, but the poor girl was in such a shock over that she couldn't move. Man, this toss gets Lily killed with her dying in Terry's arm. Damn, now you got Geese hating ass laughing and still sending his goons after them. That's a major fraud alert right there. Master Tongue comes rolling out to save the boys, but that bloke, Billy, is able to hit him in the heart with his pole, incapacitating Tongue and giving Tongue only hours to live. Tongue gets put in the hospital and Andy gets so mad he forgets that he's the side character and goes to fight Geese. Tongue wakes up after, in his last moments, he teaches Terry the Hurricane Punch, or the Seppuku. Drawing upon the energy of the earth, Terry is able to learn the techniques and heads to fight Geese. Meanwhile, Andy and Joe are getting their asses handed to him by Billy and Ryden. Now, I can understand Joe because he just got shot and he's fighting freaking Ryden. But for all that mess he was talking, Andy is struggling to take down Geese's right-hand man, the second in command. Come on now. I thought you wanted to fight Geese. You gotta be stronger than this. They are luckily able to beat both of them and go straight for Geese, only for Geese to completely foderize both of them with one hand. It was in that moment Andy realized he was not him. You are not the main character, bro. You should have set this one out. We've been telling you this, bro. You are not him. You are not Terry. Terry then shows up to fight Geese and the real fight begins. Now I gotta give it to Geese for all the bitch moves he was making in this movie, in this anime. He is pretty strong and fast. Even Terry is struggling with barely any attacks landing on him. He's still a fraud though. Terry in desperation used the Seppuku, but Geese blocks it. But then Terry remembers all that he's lost and uses the Seppuku again, defeating Geese, except he just falls into the water instead of falling off a building. After reminiscing on those that are lost, three fighters head off on their own destiny, becoming the legendary Hungry Wolves. But with his revenge accomplished, what destiny does Terry even have now? That he ponders as he leaves Southtown. The Fatal Fury anime takes a lot of liberties with the story to make it more interesting in an anime format, and I think they did very well, except Geese should have been more physically involved. Besides that, it's a cool OVA to watch alongside playing the game. The OVA isn't canon, but some elements were used for later games and to describe some of the events of the first game. Also, there are moves like the Seppuku or the Hurricane Kick, which I believe does go to a character in the future, but it's completely different, but it wasn't in the original game. You can't unlock this move, they just made this up. But we still gotta give props where props are due. This was not only one of the first fighters to have a story focus, but it was also the first one to have an animated story even before Street Fighter to go along with it. Fatal Fury was out here making moves for fighting games, and people don't talk about that enough. While many do not go back to Fatal Fury 1, its impact is still felt within the Fatal Fury series. It is the start of it after all. And hey, compared to some other fighters, even Street Fighter, it had a pretty good first game. They definitely need to lean into more of the fighting game side of things rather than the beat-em-up side, but they can still keep some of those mechanics that came with that style. Fatal Fury would go on to get more games and even start a spin-off series that would become the mainline game for all SNK fighters and games in general, with its rich lore only expanding with each entry. As for the first game though, it's still worth giving it a shot to see where things started, but after this, things definitely got a lot better. But I don't think you're gonna have a bad time playing it, especially playing as Terry. His design and characters were so cool and iconic, and it changed how fighting game protagonists could be looked at for years. Now there didn't need to be a martial arts master, it could be some street punk who had an inch of swagger ready to kick some ass on the mean streets of their hometown. And that's what really pushes Fatal Fury's uniqueness. It made it stand out from other fighting games flooding the market back then. And while it wasn't big stateside, it did move players in Japan, which kept the lights on for SNK. So if you heard of Terry from Smash, or you're just trying to look back on fighting game history, it's not a bad idea to hop on some Fatal Fury. Just know, some of the beat-em-up elements hold the game back a bit from the fighting game that it should be. Well guys, this is the J Blast Network, signing out. And don't forget, you better believe, baby. Yeah.